In the twilight glow of memories old, where laughter echoed and warmth did unfold, two hearts entwined, in a dance so sweet, time wove their story, love's rhythmic beat. With hands that trembled as years drifted past, their whispers of promise, a love that would last, yet shadows crept in where sunlight once kissed. So here they stand now, at a crossroads of fate, two souls once so close, now on the edge of hate. From aged longing to bitterness, love turned to a fight. In the twilight's embrace, they mourn through the night. This is the fate of 67-year-old Texas man John Thompson, who was faced with a life-altering revelations that shattered the foundation of his family. When a DNA test reveals that the children he has raised and loved are not biologically his, he plunges into a dark abyss of betrayal. You can imagine what compels a devoted husband and father of his age to turn to violence when the truth strikes. This is a story that uncovers the depths of despair and the lengths one might go to in reaction to profound emotional upheaval. Meet George Thompson, a seemingly ordinary man who had dedicated his life to his family. Married to Margaret for over 30 years, he cherished the life they built together, raising their children with love and care. However, everything changed when George learned through a DNA test that his beloved children were not biologically his. In a fit of betrayal and confusion, he made a split-second decision that would haunt him forever, ultimately leading to a tragic crime that shocked their quiet community. You are watching True Crime Excavate, your portal for gripping explorations into the world of real crime. Here, we dissect chilling cases, delve into unsolved mysteries, and recount tales of scandal and deception. From notorious cold cases to captivating courtroom battles and profiles of infamous criminals, we offers a wide-ranging look at the darker side of humanity. Join us as we sift through the evidence, analyze motives, and uncover hidden truths behind the stories that keep the world captivated. Subscribe and become part of a community dedicated to unraveling mysteries and seeking justice. Stay until the end, because the truth is even darker than you think. George Thompson was a familiar face in the small town of Sunnyvale, Texas. Born and raised in a family that valued hard work and integrity, he learned early on the importance of commitment and loyalty. With a strong work ethic, George made a name for himself as a dedicated manager at a local manufacturing company, earning the respect of colleagues and community members alike. His friendly demeanor and willingness to lend a helping hand earned him a reputation as a pillar of the community, someone who would always go the extra mile for his friends and neighbors. Most importantly, his marriage to Margaret had become the hallmark of his life's success. George and Margaret married young and shared the kind of love that many could only aspire to have. Together, they built a life filled with dreams, from raising their 3 children, Sarah, Jake, and Emma, to traveling and sharing countless family memories at backyard barbecues. They were known locally as the quintessential loving family. Friends often cited their marriage as an example of devotion and partnership. Both George and Margaret actively participated in their children's lives, attending school events, sports games, and embracing family traditions that brought them closer together. They envisioned a future filled with joy as they watched their children grow and thrive. However, as the years wore on, subtle signs of strain in George and Margaret's relationship began to emerge. While they had once shared their dreams effortlessly, George started to feel the pressure of being the perfect provider and father. A sense of inadequacy began to gnaw at him, especially when conversations about paternity and parenthood started to creep into their lives. Although Margaret had always assured him of their love and devotion, George couldn't shake the insecurities that lingered beneath the surface concerning their children's lineage. Moreover, late nights and increased stress at work began to take their toll. George might have seemed jovial during family gatherings, but at home, he occasionally retreated into his mind, lost in thought about his worth as a husband and father. Margaret noticed his growing withdrawal and the occasional fleeting moments of frustration that would surface during family discussions. These tiny cracks in their foundation began to sow seeds of doubt and resentment, shadows that loomed over their once idyllic relationship. As life moved forward, subtle signs of tension hinted at deeper issues within their marriage. George's feelings of insecurity began to manifest in small, nagging doubts that occasionally bubbled to the surface, especially during intimate conversations about parenting, legacy, and family. Little did they know, these seeds of uncertainty would grow into an emotional storm that would change everything. It started with casual conversations over drinks with friends, where jokes about family resemblance quickly turned into pointed comments. "You know, George, kids can look like anyone these days," one friend remarked, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. At first, George laughed it off, but unease began to worm its way into his mind. Although he had thought about this countless times when he looked deep into his family resemblance, none of his children has his stature and his resemblance. But he hadn't thought much of it. Even the day he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror one day, the reflection of their youngest daughter, Emma, staring back at him appeared unsettlingly more like a stranger than his own flesh and blood. He waved it, having trusted the happy and lovely family he built with Margaret, also with the consoling word that anybody can look like God wishes him or her to be. But with this sarcasm, his mind filled with flashes of memories, and suddenly he recalled moments from each child's birth, including his excitement followed by the moments of self-doubt he dared not voice aloud. George began to obsess over the subtle differences that had been there all along, the shape of their noses, the color of their eyes, the quirks that didn't quite match his own. These thoughts soared, and he found himself constantly scrutinizing the intricacies of their features, each examination deepening his internal doubt. After days of boiling anxiety, he struck up a conversation with Margaret about their family's history. During what started as a candid sharing of memories, the dialogue took on a more serious tone. George tentatively brought up his fears, half joking, half serious. "You know, sometimes I wonder about the kids." His voice trailed off as he noticed Margaret's expression change, seemingly shifting from affectionate to guard. "What do you mean?" she asked sharply, her eyes narrowing. Her reaction stirred a storm within George, fueling his suspicions further. It was not long after this that an impulsive thought crossed his mind. Perhaps a DNA test could provide clarity, an effort to quell the doubts festering inside him. After a few clicks online and a simple kit ordered, he finally convinced himself it was a necessary step to ease his mind, even if the truth would ultimately shatter him. Days later, the DNA test results arrived in a plain envelope, and the world around George stood still. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the unassuming packet as a rush of anxiety surged through him. His hands trembled slightly as he tore it open, catching his breath as he pulled out the results. As he read, each line felt like a hammer crashing against his skull. He was not the biological father of any of his children. The revelation struck him like lightning, a horrifying shock that ricocheted through his body. His heart raced as disbelief set in, his mind reeling from the implications of such a truth. He felt a cold wash of anger begin to rise, an overwhelming wave of betrayal crashing down upon him. How could Margaret have kept such a monumental secret from him? Questions spiraled through his thoughts like wildfires. Had it all been a lie? Was their life together merely a disguise? Who could be the real father of the kids? George's initial shock quickly transformed into a whirlwind of emotions. Rage propelled him to his feet, every muscle in his body tense with betrayal as he grappled with the reality of his life crumbling around him. He could hardly take a breath, the air thick with a sense of suffocation. Images of his children filled his mind, moments spent teaching them to ride bikes, forge friendships, and achieve little milestones that made the bond seem irreplaceable. But now, those moments were tainted by deceit. He cannot imagine his wife having an affair with another man. She is a devoted and dedicated Christian, a model in the church that every woman would wish to become, always in the church, prayerful and likes. Are these a pattern of disguise? George wondered. His internal turmoil escalated as he recoiled from his life, feeling the trust he had placed in Margaret dissolve into dust. He stormed toward the living room, his pulse pounding in his ears, the vivid revelation morphing into frantic accusations swirling in his mind. Questions for Margaret piled up like a tidal wave, demanding answers that he feared would open a Pandora's box of pain and regret. George stood at a crossroad, wrestling with emotions that swept through him like a tornado, threatening to obliterate everything he once held dear. The sanctuary they had built together felt like a haunting prison, and he knew he needed answers that would cut deeper than any knife. Little did he know that the confrontation he was about to have would plunge them into a darkness more profound than he could ever imagine. "How could you do this to our family?" he demanded, his voice trembling with rage as he threw the test results onto the kitchen table. Margaret's heart sank. She had expected the fallout but could never have anticipated the depth of George's transformation. "I didn't lie," she cried, her voice cracking under the emotional strain. "You know I thought they were yours. We were happy. We built this life together." But each defense only seemed to deepen George's bitter convictions. Every scathing argument pushed them further apart, with George's accusations growing increasingly irrational. He demanded to know who the real father was, who had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. "You must have been with someone else," he sneered during the heated exchange, eyes burning with fury. Margaret felt her heart shatter a little more with each venomous word aimed in her direction. What had once been a partnership now felt like a relentless onslaught of blame. For Margaret, the emotional toll of George's accusations left her feeling trapped in a nightmare of her own making. She had kept her secret, believing she was making the best choices for her children, but now it felt as though her life was going out of control. Each night, she lay awake, battling guilt and sorrow over decisions made years earlier, questioning if she could ever earn George's trust again. George left her at the moment and went to the sitting room ruminating with wide thoughts. In moments of quiet, when George's fury subsided into sullen silence, Margaret felt a profound sense of loss. She tried to explain her choices, to peel back the layers of her past in an attempt to find common ground, but each conversation only reignited the fire of anger in George. "I was young and scared," she pleaded during one particularly raw encounter. "I thought I was protecting us." But her justifications were met with scorn, pushing George deeper into his cycle of rage and despair. Dinner times, once joyful gatherings, transformed into silent standoffs. The laughter of the children was drowned by the thick tension in the air, leaving them uncertain of what to expect as they sat around the table. They exchanged glances filled with confusion, trying to navigate the hostility of their home without fuel to their parents' fires. The eldest of them asked their mom if everything was okay. She answered, "Yes, my dear, go on with your meal, and it is nothing serious." And when night fell, and the children sought comfort in their beds, George and Margaret found it nearly impossible to talk without igniting yet another cycle of blame. What had once been tender moments of togetherness turned cold and hostile, creating a chasm that seemed insurmountable. Every night grew racier, leaving the home engulfed in silence, punctuated only by the muffled sobs of Margaret as she lay awake, wishing for the love that once filled their home. The dreams they had built, now ghosts haunting each corner, leaving a somber reminder of what was lost and the tragedy waiting to unfold. One fateful decision loomed on the horizon, promising to bring their grief and conflict to a horrifying climax. After yet another day of strained silence punctuated by simmering arguments, George returned home to an unsettling atmosphere. The familiar sounds of laughter from the children were notably absent, replaced by the oppressive silence that wrapped around the house like a heavy fog. George found Margaret in the kitchen, her back turned to him, preparing a simple meal. He could see the tension in her shoulders, her movements fast but lacking the usual grace. "We need to talk," he declared, the words heavy with determination. Margaret turned slowly, her expression shifting from fatigue to anxiety. "George, please, not now." But George was unwilling to relent, the volcano within him threatening to erupt. "Not now? When, then?" he thundered, his voice rising with each word. "You've hidden the truth from me. I deserve to know why you lied. You think I won't find out about the kids? Do you think this is some kind of game?" The chaos of his emotions flowed freely now, reckless in its ferocity, as he stepped closer. Margaret recoiled slightly, holding the spatula like a lifeline, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she pleaded, her own voice quivering. "You didn't mean to hurt me," he shot back, incredulous. "We are talking about my children, your children. I can't believe you could do this." The air was thick with accusation and betrayal, each word sharp enough to cut. Margaret's heart raced, she fought to hold back the tears, struggling to explain her choices. "I loved you. But I was scared. I was young. I thought it was for the best." She opened up to him. "It wasn't my fault. After our marriage you were not able to give me a child. After the hospital consultations which they told us that the fault is from you, but with the remedies given to you it will be fine. Nothing really happened." When I sought for consultation from Pastor Johnson, he offered to help us, at least to remove the shame of childlessness in our family. He promised to keep it a top secret for the rest of our lives. Immediately she pronounced that. The atmosphere within the kitchen became suffocating. This got George more enraged, and he was so much disappointed with his wife and Pastor Johnson. His very good friend has turned out to be his nightmare. But how could you, Margaret? For 30 good years you hid this from me? This verbal exchange carved deep into the fabric of their relationship, unraveling the years they had spent building a life together. For the best? George spat out. This is how you protect our family? By lying? By bringing someone else's blood into our lives? The bitterness in his tone surged like wildfire, igniting every wound they had tried to cover. Overwhelmed by a concoction of betrayal, anger, and despair, George felt a primal instinct overcome him, the need to reclaim control in an uncontrollable situation. In a fit of rage, he advanced toward Margaret, his emotions flaring out of control. In a moment of desperation, Margaret decided to stand her ground, pushing back against his wrath. You don't have to act like this, George. We can fix this, she cried, her voice breaking. But George, consumed by his feelings of inadequacy and fury, felt the last vestiges of reason slip away from his grasp. You've made a fool of me, Margaret, he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. Then, in a horrific flash, he made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. With a sudden burst of violence fueled by anger and betrayal, he grabbed a kitchen knife, the blade glinting ominously under the fluorescent lights. The moment felt like time had frozen, every heartbeat echoing with a heavy finality. Margaret's eyes widened in shock as she processed what was happening, her mind racing as adrenaline surged through her body. George, no, she screamed, desperation lacing her voice as she tried to reason with him. Please, put it down. This isn't the answer. But his emotions consumed him, drowning out her pleas as chaos erupted in the kitchen. The sound of shattering glass filled the air as George lunged forward, the turmoil of his actions colliding with the emotional blackness that had taken hold of him. The struggle was swift and brutal, each moment blending into the next. Margaret fought, her instincts driving her to defend herself. The pain surged through her as they struggled. Love had turned to violence in an instant. In her heart, she could not fathom the idea of her husband turning against her like this, someone who promised to love and protect her. Panic surged within her, igniting a fierce will to survive. In that heated moment of chaos, a cacophony of emotions whirled around them, anger, fear, despair, until, in a flash of instinct, George's grip tightened on the knife. With a finality that echoed throughout the house, he drove it into her. Time stood still, and Margaret felt the world slip away, a flood of disbelief washing over her. Was this really happening? Her heart raced with realization, anguish taking root deep within. Their children were still sleeping innocently from the assurance of their mom that nothing was wrong. When the deed has finally been done, the heavy cry from Margaret waked them up and they were totally confused. George sat down beside the door thinking about what has just happened without speaking a word. In his mind, it is a perfect revenge. Sarah, the eldest daughter in a rush of safety measure, called 911 to report the incident, calling on them to come and save her mom, not knowing that she is gone. The chaotic aftermath of the confrontation erupted into the quiet streets of Sunnyvale as the echoes of the struggle died down. The piercing sound of a 911 call shattered the tension. Neighbors, alarmed by the commotion and the distant cries of children, began to gather outside, their faces painted with confusion and dread. One concerned neighbor, hearing both the shouts and the silence that followed, had picked up their phone and also dialed the police, fearing something dreadful had occurred. As the sirens wailed in the distance, children stood at their windows, wide-eyed and bewildered, witnessing the sense of unease that gripped their sleepy town. Police cars screeched to a halt outside the Jansen household minutes later, officers quickly exiting their vehicles with urgency. The scene that awaited them unfolded into stark horror, leaving absolutely no doubt that they were about to confront a tragic reality. First responders entered the home cautiously, met by the sight of disarray. Blood marked the floor where George and Margaret had clashed, and the overwhelming sense of chaos filled the space where laughter had once reigned. Detectives began their meticulous work, gathering every detail. Interviews with neighbors painted a picture of fear that had swept through the community within the weeks leading to this night, as many residents reported the palpable tension they had sensed between Margaret and George. Friends of the couple also recounted conversations hinting at trouble, revealing cracks in a facade that everyone had thought was strong. The emotional toll weighed heavily on the investigators, each detail further exposing the tragedy of a family undone. Witness accounts ranged from disbelief to heartfelt sorrow, with statements continuously reflecting on how well-liked George had been. They had admired him as a devoted husband and father, which made this confrontation all the more jarring. As news of the crime spread throughout Sunnyvale, the community was thrust into a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. The once tranquil town was now engulfed in a sensational narrative that everyone struggled to comprehend. Following the investigation, George Thompson was formally charged with first-degree murder, the most serious charge available under Texas law. With the circumstances surrounding his actions laid bare, it became evident that the prosecution would argue that George had acted with premeditation. They would paint him as a man consumed by jealousy and rage who took the law into his own hands rather than confronting the harsh realities of infidelity within his marriage. The emotionally charged nature of the case meant that every detail was scrutinized, and George's reputation as a respected figure in the community was put to the test. The community's reaction was equally mixed as they grappled with the implications of the trial. Many engaged in heated discussions about maternal and paternal rights and how deeply personal relationships can unravel under such scrutiny. The ethical dilemmas surrounding trust, fidelity, and the lengths one might go to in the name of love sparked debates that stretched far beyond the courtroom. Residents expressed their outrage, fear, and their own experiences with similar issues in private conversations, revealing the underlying crisis surrounding family dynamics in their tight-knit community. As we conclude this heart-wrenching story, we've witnessed the tragic unraveling of a life once filled with love and promise. George Thompson's shocking decision to take his wife's life after the emotionally devastating revelation of paternity has exposed the darkest depths of betrayal and anguish. The complexities surrounding familial bonds, trust, and the extremes one may go to when faced with heartbreak remind us of the fragile nature of human relationships. In the end, love turned to rage, leaving a lasting impact not just on George and Margaret, but on their entire community grappling with the fallout. We want to hear from you. What would you have done if you found yourself in George's situation? Do you think there are ever valid reasons for resorting to violence when betrayal occurs? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. Your perspectives could spark important conversations about the realities of love, trust, and family ties. And if you enjoyed this story and want more gripping, thought-provoking content, be sure to check out our other videos on True Crime Excavate. Subscribe now and watch plenty of thrilling, real-life inspired stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. See you on the next video.